All right, we're live, and I am joined today with Elizabeth Lembke. She is the Chief Talent Navigator at Transforming Talent, a virtual consultancy specializing in people and culture. And I'm sure lots of folks who are watching now recognize Elizabeth and her work, especially from the really great newsletter that she publishes on Transforming Talent Insights. Lots of really great resources. But for those in my network who don't know you, can you give just like a minute or two introduction about the work that you're currently engaged in?
Oh, thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Christopher. I'm really excited to be here tonight. So, or rather, your guys this morning. I am working from home out of Stuttgart, Germany. So it is officially 6 o'clock. So that's my world. I am a Chief Talent Navigator because when you are a freelance consultant, you can make up your own title. But it's also this piece about how I see it nowadays, or as to how are we navigating the talent in a world that's very disrupted, uncertain, but also where we're needing to build up new capabilities for things that problems we've never even had to deal with before. And so that's kind of my why and what I'm doing there. By training, I went through the hard school of automotive for 9 years, and look, I'm still alive, and I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed it. So my last corporate job was as director of global HR and talent. But I also had the responsibilities for branding, employee communications, learning and development, and corporate social responsibility. And it was not until I left that I realized that was weird. But it also, for me, is this piece of all those pieces are intertwined. And so how do we have a talent strategy and approach that encompasses that, and that the person actually receiving the product of talent development, that they actualize that they are being developed. So that kind of is my piece. From the background, I'm a work and organizational psychologist specialized in culture and work teams. Before that, I studied at the University of Oregon, so I am a proud duck. And I studied German and archaeology of Micronesia, which oddly enough is not a highly employable area. But we do things out of interest and what we need to get our bachelor's done. And I've been living out of Germany for, I'll just say 20 years plus. Maybe.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that. So we wanted to get together today and talk a little bit about talent strategies. So to kick off our discussion, and I think we'll talk for 20, 25 minutes. So for those who are watching, kind of an expectation of how long we'll go. I'm going to kick it off with a kind of, I suppose, weak and maybe trite sounding statement, and then let's dissect it and make it stronger and better. Right. So one might hypothesize that an organization, that's currently doing well with all the challenges that are in front of us has had in place a talent strategy that's pretty dynamic, and specifically ones that allow the organization to pivot quickly and take advantage of new opportunities. I think that sounds super logical, but there's a whole bunch of different constraints and specialized variables that go into all of that. And so what I thought we would do is I've got a couple of questions here that go back and forth on looking at a talent strategy and evaluating it. And let's think about how we might take that first statement and make it stronger and make it more specific to folks who are watching.
Yeah.
So let's kick it off with, if you thought your talent strategy was pretty good, like a lot of us do, and being from Minnesota and having heard Garrison Keillor for many, many, many years of my upbringing, one of the famous statements about people from Lake Wobegon ends with, and all the children are above average, right? So I think it's easy for people to think, our strategy it's pretty good, or it's above average. So if you really wanted to validate that for your own organization and your own work environment, what sort of maybe symptoms would you look to validate?
That's such a good question. I think it's so true because Paul Taylor just said yesterday, I thought it was really good. He brought out the study that said 2/3 of all managers think that they have created empowered environments which are psychologically safe, where people have the brave space to speak up. Yet less than 1/3 of the employees polled said, yeah, we believe that. So there seems to be a disconnect. So I think it's really important, like you said, to say, what are those indicators that show us, do we really have a talent strategy in place that is beyond the kind of the old school kind of supply and demand of, do we have enough talent in the pipeline to fill our upcoming positions, and really just seeing talent management and talent development as basically a glorified succession management, which nowadays that's not going to do it, and that's not going to pull its weight in terms of, like you were saying, what is a dynamic talent strategy, which is a very different piece to say, how do we have the capabilities, talents, and also the understanding of how we're utilizing and how are we putting those talents in those right roles, and that there's a good engagement, but also that people feel fulfilled, that they say, okay, I understand what the impact that I have. I understand how I'm growing in this company with my roles, what I'm learning, what I'm able to do. And then thirdly, the relationships. Do I have relationships where I'm continuing to grow and where it makes sense in terms of what I'm doing, so that you're really tapping into that intrinsic motivation, that people understand, why do you guys exist? And what's my role in terms of making this happen? And so I think the things to look for when you're looking at your talent strategy, very easy. Do you have people actually getting promoted that are good and that are successful in the new roles? So this piece of we only recommend our worst, and we pass those along. I've heard a lot of people saying COVID has been good for weeding out the organization, which I think is a horrible thing to say, but that they're able to get rid of the dead weight. And where I'm saying, well, that's part of a very bad symptom of a terrible talent strategy if you're celebrating the fact that we're in a pandemic, so that you can do the talent organization and the talent strategy that you actually need to do. So those are indicators. And I think the other thing, it used to be that talent brand or employer branding was only important when you were looking for a job. Nowadays, everybody knows exactly what's going on with employer decisions because social media, and it is that piece to think beyond what you're able to get in terms of profit. Because how you communicate that, Starbucks just this week is a great example of being very attentive to how you put your principles and your purpose into action when times get tough, and when you're really called to the floor to say, okay, how are we going to approach this? And so I think it is that piece to say, why do we do what we do the way we do it? If that's not clear in your talent strategy, you're going to have a lot of confusion, and there's going to be a lot of mismatch in terms of what you guys say you're going to do and then what actually gets done.
When we think about the back and forth between the employees that we serve and the overall talent strategy, are there certain things or certain indicators that come directly from employees? Like, if they are asking these sets of questions, there's a part of our talent strategy that's worth investigating or investing in?
No, that's really good. I mean, oftentimes we talk about net promoter scores and things like that. Do employees recommend their employer to their family and their friends? That's a great one, because you only want to talk about a place that you're proud of working for, rather than, oh, just come suffer with me. You'll get paid. That's not a good net promoter score. So I think, here what employees, and this is what I hear oftentimes from a lot of my sourcing friends, is really those pieces of what do you get to do and who do you get to work with. So you'll hear a lot about how true is this spirit of collaboration. Can you bring in different ways of thinking? How do you really belong? So a lot of work that has been done in terms of good, successful onboarding, that it's not about the red tape of, oh, we're so glad you're here. Yay, celebration. Here, this is our legal document. Please fill this out. And then, so this disconnect of managing the 99 to the 1%, that is really cut through. That's what people will talk about. They'll say, yeah, I was actually embraced as a person. They were excited to have me come in. So those types of things that come out from the employees' voices as the real promoter scores. The other thing is that you'll see is there's a lot of celebration in terms of this connection to that broader purpose. It used to be this discussion around millennials, and now it's not just millennials. We all want to say, okay, how are we making a contribution? What are the things that we're doing, and how is our effort actually broadening and making a contribution to bettering things? We're not just working just to work.
Yeah. I think there's some interesting things in what you just said that really, at least for me, resonate with the authenticity of the relationship.
Yeah,
I think it's easy to, I would say, pre-COVID times, lots of us had a next best opportunity pretty readily available. The labor market was good for a potential employee. So that the relationship between people didn't have to be as strong. I mean, you didn't have to give up so much of yourself in order to have a really good relationship. And I think, that dynamic often, I think, percolates up as a symptom of people asking for transparency. They don't have authenticity between the relationship. They're saying, boy, you're just not being transparent with me, and kind of a vague way of saying, I don't really kind of trust how this is all working out. Right? So I'm thinking the next kind of line of questions here that I've got have to do about people who aren't yet employees of an organization. How do they recognize strength of a really good talent strategy, and is that something that is communicated in such a way where people really feel like, wow, not only is this a cool place to work and I'm going to have fun opportunities to do the do, but one where it feels like, hey, this is going to be a cultural fit, and I'm willing to get more of me in order to make that happen.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I think, here, the indicators that a lot of the employees are looking for is that piece of like, how will I grow here? Do people recognize me? For me, is it personalized, or am I just going through a system where I can say, okay, this is something I'll put on my resume, but I don't necessarily feel like I will learn something here. So really this piece around effort and ability to make a difference, but also, employees will look to, what are those moves? What do people actually get to do? So there's a lot of employee testimonials. That's kind of like the employer brand, kind of the toolkit that they first go to. But people will dig deeper, and they are digging deeper in terms of saying, show me a day in the real life. And what did you learn? How did you reflect upon it? What were the challenges? What projects were you trusted with, and who did you get to interact with? So people are really drilling in a lot more than, in my very humble opinion, than they used to, because you just didn't really have access to this information. And it really, I think that's also a testimony to talent acquisition also changing gears to say, it's not just the KPI of a person that's filled a head count. It's this piece. We want time to performance. We want here integration and good network. So ONA, so organizational network analysis, gives a good indication as to how things are. But really in terms of feeling and sentiment, potential employees are really looking at Twitter. They're looking at Slack. They're looking at GitHub. They're looking at a lot of different places to say, really, what is that sense? And companies are, interestingly enough, reacting really well. So yesterday, I came across the internal communication guideline at Basecamp. I don't think I've had as many hits as with that one, because it is this piece to say, how are you addressing the elephant in the room? By not communicating, you're also communicating.
Yep.
So people saying, here, this is an internal document from Basecamp. GitHub also did an excellent one, particularly around language use that they just put out, and Trello. So a lot of these communication software or companies, Mac, of course, you would think that they would be good at it, but they're also showing that example as to, here, what is that communication collaboration culture to say, hey, we're constantly improving, but this is that piece around one team, different and equal. Empathy is everything. And how do we use humor, but also foster connection at work? Because if we're going to solve really difficult, challenging problems and projects, we have to be able to speak to the things that perhaps are a little bit uncomfortable and be okay going into conflict, but also being okay about building on other people's ideas. So really breaking through some of the former taboos as to, that's the holy grail that is product engineering. You can't shake on that. So breaking down some of those barriers. And ironically, I think that COVID with, Zoom and everyone equal, that's what I've gotten fed back, is that a lot of this open innovation or being able to be more open and authentic and transparent, ironically, through this change has been fostered by this piece of one person remote. Heck, we're all remote. We're all in the same boat. And that has actually helped create that sense of one team, common purpose.
Are organizations really kind of leading out front then on social and other places to show their strength? And have you seen people do that really well in a kind of take charge? We figured it out. It seems to be working. Here, look at all the great things that we're doing.
Yeah. So I think, there have been some wonderful examples, here Marriott for a couple of weeks ago, where the CEO came out and talked about, here, this is the principles about how we're going. I don't know how many millions of hits that got even just within the first 24 hours. So a large organization. I think another one that I'm thinking about would be like Seer Interactive, another one that basically the CEO came out and said, hey, I know you guys are safe here in terms of our payment, but we know that your employee, that your spouses or your parents are stressed out about not having salary. So he detailed a process as to, how can we get salary assistance and payment for your spouse or your parents? Because we really do care about you. And so those things get spread viral very quickly in a positive sense. And it is that piece of saying, how are we doing the right thing when times are tough? What I've been hearing in some of the work groups that I'm leading is that this principle-based leadership is really good, and that's something that the leaders really wanted to adhere to in March and April. Where things are getting a little bit stickier now in May and June is as finances and as quarterly close, et cetera, those things come up. It is that balance to say, okay, and what do we do now? We had those pieces that we were going to be stand up and really take care of our people. Now our budgets are sinking, our profit margins are sinking. What are we going to do? I think there's great examples of, like Airbnb and basically putting out their talent list and saying, here, these are awesome people. How can we facilitate them getting those next jobs? So even when times are tough, saying, okay, how can we facilitate our talents moves? That reverberates through not only the Twitterverse, but also it sticks in the people's heads as to, are these employers of choice when times hopefully do come back up?
So let's talk a little bit about what makes a sustainable base so that you can be outward focused. Once you've got a good talent strategy that has an opportunity for you to pivot when pivoting is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm picking up on in some of these questions is, and your great answers are how outward focused all of this becomes, whether or not you're planning for it to be outward focused, right? And
Yeah.
so having a good base is probably really important.
Yeah.
If you were gonna start, what would be the pillars that you would line up and say, hey, if we're going to put together something that's going to be sustainable, allows us to pivot when we really have to pivot quickly, but more so makes it something that we can manage and execute towards, what are those main pillars to set it up?
So I think for me, the main pillars would be to say, okay, first context. So what is your industry? I like to say value creation in a volatile world is what the users actually decide. So it's not necessarily your customer. It's what your customer's customer actually needs them for. So if it's not clear what they need them for, then there's going to be a lot of problems in terms of how you're able to actually sell. So really understanding what's the context of your market, what's affecting the ability to not only survive, but actually adapt and thrive. And so there's a lot of great examples out of environmental, social, and governance organizations that are actually doing better than a lot of the Standards and Poor's. So that just came out fairly recently. And they said, one of the reasons is that they actually had a lot of good policies and very open around the transparency and also in terms of the plurality and diversity approach. So that would be one thing I would look to, of course, is the context. What is your business? Where are you? What's your niche? What are you actually doing? And what do people actually need it for? And being very clear about that. The next one that I would look to is, what are those principles? So if this is, why your organization exists, it's that piece of, and how do we do what we do? So if we say, everyone's development is important, then that means that we don't just focus on that 0.3% that is the going up and reporting into the board. It's really saying, okay, how do we have a healthy and robust talent development strategy and pipeline to say everyone gets the development that they need? And not only for today, in terms of how are we enabling people to do the jobs, but also tapping in what are those different interest capabilities in terms of real growth. The other thing I would look to, and I think nowadays in terms of talent strategy, is you have to look to well-being. Because I'm sorry, I have a 12-hour shift. You're not going to be high in terms of your output, your quality. And so what we're asking about our medical personnel, what we're asking of parents in terms of juggling school. Now school's breaks is coming in. That might be a little bit more difficult depending upon how you're managing your kids. But there's a lot of stressors that are going on. So we have to look to, what is the health and the work and the, just kind of the conduct of viability. So looking at people's well-being and understanding that all of us are going to run a marathon and feel good about it. The other one that I would look to is, do people see that around that personal growth? So it's not, we used to talk about portfolio careers, really for engineers, et cetera. But as times change, and exactly to your point, it's coming from a seller's market to a buyer's market. There's a lot of options for people who are wanting good talent nowadays because there's a lot more of us on the market. So it is that piece of how are you putting together a creative career that showcases your learning agility, that showcases, what is that unique magic sauce that you bring to the table. And also, where do you have your own learning? So a lot of people have been using this time to expand just also their capabilities and competence. Then I would look to drivers. At the end of the day, there's different things that motivate us. So here, what are those things that drive you? What really interests you? What are you looking for in terms of impact? That's still going to be very personal. So making sure that your drivers talk to that, but also you understand it for your business. So what's going to be important for your business in terms of drivers and being able to make that connection back. And then the final one is really looking at what are the goals. So this is then back to the business and it has to be circular, because if you don't have the goals together with the context, then there's definitely a disconnect. But saying, you know, how do these goals really fit to what you're trying to accomplish and what that real value impact is, and that people can identify, how is my effort actually making a difference here? And so those are the things that we look to when we're looking at the talent ecosystem, is to say, how well do we map those things out for what you're trying to not only compete in, but really where can you innovate? Because it's not, you know, nowadays it's not being better than your next competitor. That's you know, that old Tracy book about that's old school. It's an innovation market. And it is an adaptive innovation market. So how well are you able to adapt and not only be dynamic, but really understand and listen as to what's needed and be able to fill that niche and co-create.
Fantastic. I think we're kind of wrapping up here on 25 minutes. So I want to ask a couple of things. I'll put up this is your site, transformingtalent.co. What sort of things and resources do you have available for people who want to dig into this topic area?
Awesome. So so I have things around co-creation. So co-creator.space, how can you create adaptive, thriving teams? How do you get through that? I have some resources there, as well as HR improv. How do we shake things up within HR and go a little bit more into that risk and fun space, but also a lot of, like you said, articles, but also some things that I have found really great in terms of forward-thinking thinkers out of talent acquisition, out of learning, out of talent, that have inspired me and also kind of fostered that piece. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we're doing Allen Interactions and Elizabeth are teaming up to do a webinar this week, and it's free. It's on June 17th. If you're interested in registering, here's one link, and then I'll put one here in the public comments that will send you right to, there it goes, right to the talent ecosystem webinar that you're going to do with Mike. Can you maybe give us just a tiny preview of what other topics you might be covering in that webinar?
Absolutely. So I'm so excited to do this together with Mike Hruska. He's awesome. And we've been jamming for a while around this talent ecosystem and what are those different changes, and how do we help organizations understand their learning ecosystem, and how does it map to what we need to do in terms of understanding, you know, this plethora of talent that we're dealing with. And it's not only the people on our staff. So giving some orientation points, some provocative questions, because that's, you know, you wouldn't know Mike any other way, right? Yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking through, and then giving some resources, but also, you know, as you bring it back to your own organization, your own challenges, giving some helps as to some things to think through before you continue to proceed.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining me, and I hope those who had a chance to watch our discussion today will seek out the additional information that you've got on your site and join us for that webinar coming up on Wednesday.
Really excited. So thanks so much. This was awesome.
Well, thanks for staying up late.
I'm going to go get some dinner now.
Right.
All right.
Fantastic. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
You bet.
Bye.
Bye.